Chapter 6. Laughing so hard he had to hold his stomach, Corin sat down abruptly. He only partially landed on the bench and ended up on the floor at M-Trey's feet. That's nothing! He swiped his hands at the tears streaming down his face. I'd forgotten all about it. The Gand looked down at him. Oral was not aware murder was seen as mirthful. Noir then folded his arms. It isn't. About the time Rasati stepped back, imposing M-Tray between herself and him, Corin realized he'd quickly destroyed what his previous socializing had accomplished. He scrambled to his feet and composed himself. I can explain this. I really can. The Twi'lek lawyer twitched a brain tail at him. I've heard that before. Yeah, well, this is the truth, unlike what your clients were probably saying. Corin looked at the droid. Can you tap into registry files from here? I am fully capable of a whole host of functions in that regard. Good. See if you can pull up the death files for the names and the reports about the murders, then match them up with birth bites. As the droid's eyelights started to flicker, Corin turned back to his squadron mates. The short form is this. At Corsac, in my division, we had an Imperial liaison officer who had had enough ambition to dream about being a Grand Moff, and just enough talent for dealing with regs and bureaucracy to be a severe problem. He wanted us to bear down on all rebel smuggling in the system, but we were more concerned about hunting down the kinds of pirates who actually hurt folks, glit smugglers and the like. Lure, that was the intelligence officer's name, threatened to bring us up on charges of aiding the rebellion. The Imperials fleeing to Corellia after the Emperor's death gave the Diktat a lot of support, and that meant Imperial officers suddenly had the muscle to back up their threats. My boss, Gil Bastra, decided to make up new identities for himself, my partner Ayala Wasiri, her husband Dirk, and myself, but he knew Lure would be suspicious of time we all spent together outside the office. Gil and I made up the records for these smugglers, put hints out that they existed and were very bad, and then put out reports that they'd been murdered. Lure saw all the reports, and reading them was the closest he ever got to a field investigation. In a staged scene in the office, Gil accused me of having executed the smugglers, and I said I hadn't and that he couldn't prove it anyway. We had a public falling out, and Lure assumed we never met up with each other after that. We did, and set things up so we could head out and away from the Empire. Corin sighed. Lure and I did not get along at all. He threatened me with a death mark for those deaths if I ever got out of line. When I took off, when he set me up and failed to kill me, he followed through. That's where the death mark comes from. The Twi'lek opened his hands and looked at the droid. Do you have the records, M-Tray? I do. They have birth bites. Gil did good work. Convert the time of their births to military time. Reverse values for minutes and hours, then compare that to the birth date of the next person in alphabetical order, using BASIC, of course. The droid tilted his head to the right. There is a progression. The birth time of one is the month and day of the birth of the next, but the pattern does not loop all the way around. It does if you add in my birthday and birth time. Corin smiled. On top of that, the hospital where they were born doesn't exist, nor does the town where it's supposed to be. Rysati emerged from behind the droid and patted Corin on the shoulder. I'm happy to know you're innocent, but couldn't you have found something aside from death to use to fool your imp? Well, when you're in Corsac, you see enough death that you have to joke about it or it grinds you down. Besides, watching Lure read the fictional reports and react to them was funny. Then he would find Gilbastra's death file amusing, I take it. Corin's jaw dropped open. What? The droid's head became level. There is a notice of Gilbastra's death. It came when I asked for the data on all the names with the report. That can't be. Oh, I'm afraid it is, sir. M-Tray's head tilted to the left. It was appended to Imperial Holonet transmission number A34920121. The pilot shook his head. wishing he didn't feel so hollow inside. Gil dead? No, I don't believe it. Gil can't be dead. The Twi'lek eased Corin down onto the bench. How reliable is the report of his death? The droid's eyes flickered for a moment. Answering that question would compromise intelligence gathering operations. What difference does it make, Noara? Corin rubbed both hands over his face. It was reliable enough to be put out on the holonet. Noara smiled carefully, though the sight of his sharp-pegged teeth carried with it a hint of menace. No, Corin. The report of a death went out on the holonet. That says nothing about the reliability of the information upon which the report was based. That report could have been based on something your guild did, or even something this lure did to get at you. He's right. You must have been one grand lawyer to spot that sort of inconsistency. The Twi'lek slapped Corin on the shoulder. You would have hated me if you were trying to make a case against one of my clients, whether he was lying about his innocence or not. So, Emtray, how reliable is this report? Are there other reports that corroborate it? I have no related reports. It wouldn't make any difference if you did, at least not any that came out of Corellian Security Force files. Gil had full access to the database. The same way he created new identities for my partner, her husband, himself, and me. He would have entered everything to make it look good. He really went all out. We had temporary identities that let us travel to the worlds where he had created solid identities we could hide behind. At my last destination, he had me working as an aide for the local military prefect. Rysati gave Corin a hard stare with her hazel eyes. So are you saying you aren't Corin Horn? No, I am Corin Horn. I used the identities Gil made for me when I ran and hid, but I joined the rebellion as myself. Corin took a deep breath and sighed heavily. Look, what I've told you about myself is true, but I haven't told you everything. It's not that I haven't trusted you, but a lot of it I didn't want to talk about. I... The blonde woman reached out and squeezed his shoulder. Hey, we all have bad memories. Thanks, Riss. Corin's chest felt tight, but as he spoke, he could feel some of the tension ease. There was a lot of bad blood between Lure and me, and knowing I was going to head out, I really started defying him. He decided to have me dealt with. On what I thought would be my last assignment, I drew an X-Wing from the pool of craft we'd captured and converted to Corsac use. I was supposed to pull a surprise inspection on small-time smugglers who were coming in system. Whistler and I mounted up. The R2 had served as my partner in the field and had all of my new identity files Gil had made up for me. Unbeknownst to Lure, Whistler also had already computed the number of jumps from Corellia since I had planned to take him with me when I left. Where the smugglers were supposed to be, I found debris and 2 flights of ties looking for trouble. I illuminated a couple with my lasers, then jumped out. That's the start of a long story about how and why I'm here now. Emtray looked down at him, his eyes glowing like stars in his black face. Sir, do you have copies of the identity files for Mr. Bastra and the others? Nope. Gil was the only person with a complete set, and I'm sure he destroyed them. I've only got mine, and they're stored in Whistler's memory. Perhaps, sir, if you could provide me with your files, I can search our databases and see if I can locate other files that were similarly sliced, thereby determining if Mr. Bastra's new identity is known to us. Oral sees the wisdom of this. Corin smiled over his shoulder at the Gand. So do I. I don't see how it can hurt. Sir, if you will permit me then, I will make inquiries of your R2 unit and try to solve this mystery. Corin nodded. Do what you need to do. Yes, sir. Which reminds me. The droid passed each of the pilots a narrow piece of plastic with an embedded black magnetic strip on the back. These are your room assignments. Mr. Horn and Mr. Queeg will continue to be billeted together. Mr. Venn, you will room with Mr. Jace, and Mistress Yenura will share a room with Mistress Delaret. The Corellian looked back at the Gand. At least I know you don't snore. Heck, I don't even know if you breathe. The soft tissues just inside Oral's mouth wobbled around for a second. Oral does not believe that you do either. Oral does not sleep in the same manner as most others, so your occasional production of rhythmic nocturnal sound is not a problem. Oral finds it somewhat soothing, in fact. First time I've heard it described as soothing. Corin blushed, then stood and patted the Twi'lek on the arm. I don't think you can describe anything about your roommate as soothing, my friend. Noara's red eyes darkened slightly. Since I won't be fighting with Jace for mirror space to preen, I think our conflicts will be minimal. I shall take solace in that fact. Rysati, on the other hand, will have more trouble with the other Theferin. Why? You think I'm going to worry about my looks to impress the lot of you? No chance. Rysati folded her arms over her chest. I'm going to be spending my time becoming the best pilot there is in this squadron, so romance is not high on my list of priorities. Corin smiled. Besides, you don't need to work to be beautiful, Riss. Sure. Just you remember that when I turn your X-Wing into slag. Oh, I hope you would not do that, Mistress Ydar. A plaintive tone warbled through Emtre's words and his arms flailed. The forms I would have to fill out, the court-martial and requisition for new parts. The work would be endless. Easy, Emtre. I was joking. Ah. Oh, yes, of course you were. The black droid's arm settled back down to his sides. If you have no further need of me, I will find this Whistler of yours, Mr. Horn, and see what I can do to learn more about the fate of your friend. Thank you, Emtre. Corin suppressed a smile as the droid turned about with tiny steps, then headed for the door. Noara, did you have to deal with protocol droids in court? The tips of the Twi'lek's head tails recoiled. They functioned as paralegals, but never were allowed into court without restraining bolts. A judge once threw a gavel at one. Not your droid, I take it. No. I was not a welcome sight in Imperial courts, so any droid I could have afforded would not have been allowed in. Rysati frowned. But then there was no chance that the defense you offered your clients would be as strong as it should have been. That's not just. Law and justice are seldom served at the same time. Noara shrugged. The quest for justice has brought us all to the Alliance, has it not? Riz, you want justice for the dislocation of your family when the Empire made them flee from Bespin. I am looking for the justice I could not get from my clients. Corin wants the justice denied to innocent people oppressed by Imperial officials. Noara stopped and turned towards the Gand. And you, my friend, what is the justice you seek? Oral's armored lids closed for a second over his multifaceted eyes. Oral does not believe you would fully understand what it is Oral seeks. The acceptance Oral has known here is indeed a welcome relief from the prejudice of the Empire. This shall suffice as Oral's justice. A noble quest indeed, Oral, Noara assured him. Corin led the quartet from the briefing room. Their route to their new homes took them out of the main complex through a tunnel to a smaller warren of rooms and suites. The rebel base had once been an extensive mine complex on Commonor's largest moon, Folor. The Commonor system had been chosen because of the high level of shipping traffic that passed through it, and because of its proximity to Corellia and the core worlds. Corin led his right-hand trail over the smooth surface of the tunnel walls. Are we really after justice, Noara? Or do we really want revenge? Or is this a case, Corin, where revenge and justice are two aspects of the same thing? We are all committed to seeing the Empire brought down. The Emperor's death advanced our cause, but not enough to bring the conflict to the conclusion we want. 3 in 10 worlds are in open rebellion, and perhaps another 20% are nominally supportive of our fight, but half the worlds are still firmly allied against us. When the Emperor dissolved the Senate, he gave the Moffs control over their provinces. While I do not believe Palpatine saw that action as a hedge against disaster, that is, in effect, what it has become. I know. If not for some of the Moffs playing power games against each other, we'd be hard-pressed to keep from being driven away from the core. The Corellian frowned. Then again, with Vader and the Emperor dead and the Death Stars destroyed, I wonder if the rebellion hasn't lost some of its fire. I agree with that. Rasade moved to the front of the quartet, then turned to walk backwards down the hallway and face them. Vader was a symbol, just like the Emperor, and when they died, the relief was palpable. I think a lot of folks believe the whole rebellion was won there. I'm taking the revitalization of Rogue Squadron as a sign that at least Commander Antilles and Admiral Akbar don't share that belief. The Twi'lek looped one of his brain tails back over his left shoulder. By defeating the Emperor at Endor, the rebellion proved itself a legitimate power in the galaxy. Within a month after Endor, the Alliance's Provisional Council issued their declaration of a new republic. The rebellion became a government, albeit one with very little in terms of real assets, and it presented an alternative to the Empire. Worlds joining the new republic are doing well on their own terms, and those negotiations are far from joyous things. Destroying the Emperor did bring a lot of nations into the fold, but primarily those who felt most oppressed or most threatened. Corran thought for a moment. What you're saying is that the victory at Endor transformed a military insurgency into a political entity. Not exactly, but close. Politics was always part of the rebellion, but it remained largely dormant while the war was being fought. With the death of the Emperor, it became more important because it allowed the rebellion to bring in more worlds without having to resort to military conquest. Noara pointed vaguely back behind them with a taloned finger. Commander Antilles' victory tour shows how important politics was and is to the rebellion. A key military leader was taken out of service and forced into diplomatic duty. And there are all the stories about Luke Skywalker and the possibility of reestablishing the Jedi Knights. Rasadi smiled. Even though the Jedi had been wiped out by the time I was born, my grandmother used to tell me stories about them in the Clone Wars. My grandfather fought in the Clone Wars. The Twi'lek stared at Corran. Your grandfather was a Jedi? No, just an officer with Corsac, like my father and me. He knew some Jedi Knights and fought alongside them in a couple of actions near Corellia, but he wasn't one. His best friend was, and died in the wars, but Grandpa never talked about those times very much. Corran glanced down. When Vader started hunting down all the Jedi, Corsac resources were used to find them, and my grandfather didn't like that at all. The sort of resentment such imperial action engendered among the people is precisely the means by which the Alliance is able to bring worlds in to join it. Princess Organa and a host of diplomats working for the Alliance have done more to strengthen the New Republic than the whole Katana fleet could do, if that legend were true, and we had control of it. Even so, there's a limit to what the diplomats can do. Hence the reconstitution of Rogue Squadron. I think so, Corran. Rysati frowned. What am I missing? Corran jerked his head towards Noara. He's saying that the diplomats have pretty much mined all the ore they can find. The worlds who want to join us have. Those who don't, haven't. And those who aren't sure will need some convincing. Thafera, for example, is the source of 95% of the Bacta in the galaxy. They're neutral right now and making grand profits selling to all sides, but we want them in our camp. Putting 2 of their people in Rogue Squadron sends a message to the Theferans that we value them. The same goes for having the Bothan in the squadron. And the unit is commanded by a Corellian, and has another Corellian pilot in it. Noara tapped himself on the chest. I'm either a token Twi'lek or a token lawyer. Rysati laughed. I'm a token refugee, I guess. Oral snapped a trio of fingers against his billet data card. Oral is token Gand. So if this unit is a symbol that's filled with symbols, the supposition is that we have to do something very symbolic to get more worlds to join the New Republic. Corran smiled. As long as that means I get to bring justice to a bunch of Imperial pilots, I'm all for it. Oh, I think you'll have that opportunity, Corran. The Twi'lek's rosy eyes darkened to the color of dried blood. I'd guess Rogue Squadron will have the greatest of that sort of opportunity. You think you know what target will be coming up next, Noara? It's only logical, Corran. Both of the Twi'lek's head tails twitched in tandem. Before too long, we'll be going after the biggest symbol of all. Let's hope they train us very well. because Rogue Squadron is bound to be the tip of the spear the Alliance stabs into the heart of the Empire. A chill ran down Corin's spine. Coruscant? The sooner it falls, the sooner the Empire falls apart. I never wanted to go to Coruscant. The Corellian pilot smiled. But if I have to go, doing it in the cockpit of a Rebel X-Wing will make the visit just that much more memorable. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.